Dad, you have a new close family DNA match. Those 8 words appeared on my phone at 6:17 on a quiet Tuesday morning, and within seconds, they reopened a chapter of my life I had spent 12 years trying to bury. My name is Thomas Whitaker. I'm 63 years old, and until that moment, I believed I had already lost everything that mattered. 12 years earlier, my wife Carolyn walked away with my house, most of my savings, and worst of all, my children. At the time, I thought the pain would eventually fade. People always say time heals wounds. What they don't tell you is that some wounds simply become part of who you are. I was sitting alone at the small kitchen table in my apartment outside Columbus, Ohio. The coffee in front of me had already gone cold. Rain tapped softly against the window. The place was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. My life had become predictable in recent years. Wake up, drink coffee, read the news, go to work, come home, repeat. It wasn't the life I imagined when I was younger, but it was a life I had learned to accept. Then my phone buzzed. At first, I ignored it. Most notifications were advertisements or reminders I didn't need. But something about the message caught my attention. The alert came from a DNA ancestry service I had signed up for years ago. I almost laughed when I saw it. I hadn't opened that app in nearly a decade. Back when Carolyn left, I stopped caring about family trees, family histories, and anything else connected to the word family. Yet there it was. A notification marked high priority. A close family match had been identified. I opened the app. My hands were steady then. They wouldn't stay that way for long. The screen loaded slowly. A spinning circle appeared. Then a name appeared underneath the notification. I stared at it. Read it once, twice, 3 times. My heart began pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The name meant nothing to me. I had never seen it before in my life. But according to the report, the person shared enough DNA to be considered immediate family. Immediate family. The words felt impossible. I sat back in my chair and looked around the empty apartment as though someone might explain what I was seeing. There had to be a mistake, a software error, a mixed sample, something, because the alternative made no sense. The alternative suggested that the story I had believed for 12 years might not be the real story at all. I thought about Carolyn, about the divorce papers, about the courtroom where I signed documents while trying not to fall apart. I thought about Daniel and Emily, my children, the children I hadn't spoken to regularly in years. The children who grew up believing I abandoned them. I had spent countless nights wondering if they hated me, wondering if they ever thought about me, wondering if they remembered the camping trips, the backyard baseball games, the birthday cakes I stayed up late decorating. Those memories never left me, even when everything else did. I looked back at the screen. The DNA match remained there, waiting, silent, unmoving, yet somehow powerful enough to shake the foundations of my entire life. A cold feeling settled in my chest. Not fear exactly, something deeper. The feeling you get when a locked door suddenly opens and you realize there may be an entire world hidden behind it. I didn't know it yet, but that notification was the first crack in a wall of lies that had been standing for more than a decade. And once that wall started breaking, nothing in my life would ever be the same again. I did not leave the kitchen for nearly an hour after seeing that notification. The coffee sat untouched beside me while rain continued sliding down the window pane. Every few minutes I looked back at the screen, hoping the name would somehow disappear. It never did. Finally, I locked my phone and set it face down on the table. I knew exactly what would happen if I kept staring at it. Old memories would come back. The kind that never really leave. The kind that simply wait for an invitation. 12 years earlier, I still lived in the house Carolyn and I had bought together. It was a 2-story home on a quiet street lined with maple trees. Nothing fancy, just a place where a family could grow. Daniel was 12 then. Emily was 7. Every Saturday morning, I made pancakes while the kids argued over who got the last piece of bacon. Carolyn used to laugh at their bickering. Looking back now, that feels like someone else's life. Someone else's family. The changes did not happen overnight. That is what makes them so difficult to recognize when they are happening. Carolyn became distant little by little. More evenings away. More unexplained meetings. More conversations that ended the moment I entered the room. Whenever I asked if something was wrong, she smiled and told me I was imagining things. So I believed her. People trust the person they build a life with. At least I did. Then one afternoon she told me she wanted a divorce. No warning. No discussion. Just a decision that had apparently already been made. I remember standing in the living room staring at her while Daniel and Emily played outside. The sound of their laughter drifted through the open window. I wanted to ask 100 questions, but only one came out. Why? Carolyn looked away before answering. She said we had grown apart. She said she needed a different future. She said many things that sounded reasonable enough to repeat in a courtroom. Within weeks, lawyers became involved. Meetings replaced conversations. Documents replaced trust. I barely recognized my own life. What hurt most was not losing the marriage. It was watching my relationship with my children slowly disappear. The story Carolyn told them was not the story I would have told. But children believe the parent, who is there every day. I understood that. Even so, it broke my heart. Daniel stopped returning my calls as often. Emily became shy whenever we spoke. The distance grew month after month until it felt impossible to cross. During the final hearing, I sat quietly while financial records were reviewed and property decisions were finalized. I still remember the fluorescent lights above me, the cold air inside the room, the sound of papers sliding across a table. Years of work, years of savings, years of memories reduced to signatures on legal forms. When it was over, I walked out carrying a cardboard box with a few personal belongings. That was all. I told myself that possessions could be replaced. Houses could be replaced. Money could be earned again. What I could not replace were birthdays I missed, school graduations I never attended, family photographs taken without me standing in them. Over time, I stopped expecting anything to change. I rented a small apartment, worked longer hours than I should have, built a quieter life, not a better life, just a smaller one. Eventually, the pain settled into something manageable. Then that DNA notification arrived. And for the first time in 12 years, I found myself wondering whether the story I accepted had never been the truth at all. I spent the rest of that evening trying to convince myself there was a simple explanation. Maybe the company had made a mistake. Maybe someone had uploaded incorrect information. Maybe the match belonged to a distant relative I had never heard about. But every explanation felt weaker than the one before it. Around 8 o'clock, I opened the application again and studied the details more carefully. The match percentage was too high to ignore. This was not some distant branch of a family tree. According to the report, this person shared enough genetic material to be connected through an immediate family relationship. My stomach tightened. I clicked through every available screen, reading the same information over and over. The name attached to the profile was Grant Holloway. The profile photo showed a man in his late 50s standing beside a fishing boat somewhere on a lake. He looked ordinary. The kind of man you might pass in a grocery store without remembering his face 5 minutes later. Yet somehow his name had just entered my life like a storm. I searched my memory. Nothing. No neighbor. No coworker. No family friend. I had never met a Grant Holloway. At least not that I could remember. The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. I stood and walked to the living room window. The rain had stopped. Streetlights reflected off the wet pavement below. For a long time, I simply stared outside. 12 years is a long time to carry unanswered questions. Most people eventually stop asking them because the answers seem impossible to find. I had reached that point years ago, but now those old questions were. Waking up again, I found myself thinking about details I had ignored during my marriage. Small things. Strange things. Carolyn had always been careful with information. She managed the family calendar. She handled most of the paperwork. She insisted on organizing tax records, medical documents, and school forms. At the time, I considered it helpful. Now I wondered if there was another reason. One memory returned unexpectedly. Daniel had needed a medical form completed for a sports program when he was 13. I remembered offering to handle it. Carolyn immediately volunteered instead. The discussion had seemed insignificant back then. Now I found myself replaying it in my head. Another memory surfaced. Years before the divorce, Carolyn became unusually upset when a friend suggested our family try one of those ancestry kits that were becoming popular. I remembered laughing about it at the dinner table. Carolyn did not laugh. She quickly changed the subject. At the time, I thought she simply disliked sharing personal information online. Tonight, that moment felt different. Every old memory seemed to carry a new shadow. Around midnight, I finally sat back down and opened my laptop. I searched public records for Grant Holloway. Several results appeared. One immediately caught my attention. The man lived less than 70 miles from where Carolyn and I had once lived. 70 miles. Not 700. Not across the country. Close. Uncomfortably close. My heartbeat quickened. Coincidence still felt possible, but it no longer felt likely. I closed the laptop and rubbed my eyes. Exhaustion was beginning to settle in, but sleep felt impossible. For 12 years, I believed my past was finished. I believed the story was over. Yet sitting there alone in the dim light of my apartment, I realized something unsettling. The story might never have ended. It might have simply been waiting for someone to uncover the missing pages. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, another memory surfaced. Some were ordinary. Some felt insignificant. Yet together they formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. The next morning, sunlight pushed through the blinds, casting long stripes across my living room floor. I sat with a fresh cup of coffee and opened an old storage box I had not touched in years. Most people keep photographs to remember happier times. I had packed mine away because remembering had become too painful. Inside were family pictures, report cards, birthday cards, and old receipts from vacations we took when the children were young. I began sorting through them slowly. At first, I was simply looking for distraction. Then I started noticing dates. Certain dates seemed to repeat themselves in my mind. Business trips Carolyn claimed were work-related. Weekends when she suddenly needed to visit friends. Conferences that always appeared on the calendar with very little notice. Back then I never questioned any of it. Marriage requires trust. Or at least I believed it did. Around noon, I found an old photo album from a summer trip to Lake Erie. Daniel was smiling beside me on a fishing dock. Emily sat on my shoulders holding a stuffed animal. Carolyn stood nearby wearing sunglasses and looking away from the camera. I stared at that picture for several minutes. What struck me was not what I saw. It was what I remembered. That trip had happened during a period when Carolyn seemed distracted almost constantly. At the time, I assumed she was stressed. Looking back now, I could not shake the feeling that something else had been happening beneath the surface. I closed the album and opened my laptop again. This time I searched deeper. Public records, archived social media accounts, property information, anything connected to Grant Holloway. Hours passed. Most of what I found appeared ordinary. Employment history, address records, community events. Then I discovered something that made me stop breathing for a moment. Nearly 14 years ago, Grant Holloway had owned a small consulting company that occasionally worked with regional businesses. One of those businesses happened to be the same company where Carolyn worked at the time. I leaned back in my chair. The room suddenly felt smaller. Coincidences happen. I know that. But this was becoming a long chain of coincidences. The kind that no longer feels accidental. I opened another document. Then another. Slowly, dates began lining up. Not perfectly, just enough to make me uncomfortable. Certain work conferences Carolyn attended overlapped with projects connected to Grant's company. Certain travel reimbursements appeared during the same periods. None of it proved anything. Not yet. But for the first time, I felt something I had not felt in years. I felt curious instead of defeated. For 12 years I had accepted every explanation handed to me. I accepted the divorce. I accepted losing my home. I accepted the distance between me and my children. Most of all, I accepted the idea that searching for answers would only cause more pain. Now I was beginning to wonder whether silence had cost me more than the truth ever could. Late that afternoon, my phone buzzed. The sound startled me. Hardly anyone called anymore. I looked down and saw a name I had not expected to see. Daniel, my son. I stared at the screen as it continued ringing. 12 years of distance suddenly felt compressed into a few seconds. My hand hovered above the phone. Then I answered. Neither of us spoke immediately. The silence carried years of misunderstandings. Finally, Daniel cleared his throat. His voice sounded older than the one I remembered. More cautious. More guarded. Then he asked a question that sent another chill through me. He said, "Dad, why did you suddenly look at that DNA account after all these years?" For a moment, I could not answer. Hearing Daniel's voice after so many years felt unreal. I had imagined conversations like this countless times, but none of those imagined versions prepared me for the actual moment. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window. The evening sky had turned pale orange above the parking lot outside my apartment. I did not look for it, I finally said. The notification found me. Silence followed. Not an angry silence. Not an uncomfortable one. More like two people standing on opposite sides of a river, trying to figure out whether a bridge still existed. Daniel exhaled slowly. Mom was upset when she heard about it. That sentence immediately caught my attention. How did she hear about it? I asked. Another pause. Because I received a notification too. My grip tightened around the phone. Suddenly, pieces that did not fit before began moving into place. You have an account? I asked. I signed up about a year ago, Daniel said. Mostly out of curiosity. I never paid much attention to it until recently. His voice sounded cautious, as if he were choosing every word carefully. Dad, there is something strange happening. I closed my eyes. Tell me. He hesitated again. A few weeks ago, I received a match request from someone I did not recognize. The same person you are probably seeing now. My heart started beating faster. Grant Holloway? Daniel did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice had become noticeably quieter. Yes. Neither of us said anything for several seconds. 12 years of distance suddenly seemed less important than the mystery now sitting between us. What did your mother say? I finally asked. Daniel laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. That is the strange part. She overreacted. I remembered that reaction from years ago. The way Carolyn could appear perfectly calm until a specific subject appeared. Then everything changed. What do you mean? I asked. I mentioned the name during dinner one night. She immediately told me to ignore the notification. She said those DNA websites make mistakes all the time. Then she changed the subject. Daniel paused. The next day she asked if I had contacted him. When I said no, she seemed relieved. A cold feeling settled in my chest. That did not sound like someone dismissing an error. That sounded like someone afraid of a question. Daniel continued. Dad, there is more. I stood and began pacing across the apartment. What is it? I checked the account again yesterday. The relationship estimate changed after an update. My stomach tightened. Changed how? According to the new estimate, the connection is closer than before. I stopped walking. How close? The silence that followed felt endless. Then Daniel spoke words I knew I would never forget. Close enough that I do not think this is a coincidence anymore. I looked at the photographs still spread across my table. Family, vacations, birthday parties, school events, memories I had spent years protecting because they were all I had left. Suddenly, every picture seemed to carry a question hidden just beneath the surface. Daniel cleared his throat. Dad, I need to know something. What? I asked quietly. Have you ever suspected that Mom was hiding something from both of us? Daniel's question stayed with me long after the call ended. I stood beside the window looking at the lights from nearby apartments while memories moved through my mind like old film reels. The honest answer was yes. Deep down, I had suspected for years that there were pieces of the story I never received. But suspicion and proof are very different things. I think there were things I never understood, I finally told him. But I never had evidence. Daniel was quiet. Then he surprised me. Neither did I, he said. Until recently. We spoke for another hour that night. Not about blame. Not about the divorce. Not even about Carolyn. For the first time in more than a decade, we talked like father and son. The conversation felt awkward at first, like two strangers learning how to trust each other. But underneath the awkwardness was something else. Curiosity. Hope. Maybe even relief. Before hanging up, Daniel told me he wanted to investigate further. I warned him to move carefully. If there was a hidden truth, rushing toward it would not make it easier to understand. After the call ended, I sat alone in silence. Yet for the first time in years, the silence felt different. Less empty. Less permanent. The next morning, I woke up to 3 messages from Daniel. The first contained screenshots from the DNA website. The second included updated relationship estimates. The third simply said, Dad, I think you need to see this. Attached was a photograph of an old document. I opened it immediately. It was a company newsletter from 14 years ago. Carolyn appeared in a group photograph during a regional business conference. Standing 3 people away from her was Grant Holloway. My chest tightened. The image itself proved very little. People attend conferences every day. Yet this was the first time I had seen both names connected in the same place at the same time. I enlarged the photograph and studied it carefully. Carolyn looked younger, of course. So did Grant. Both were smiling toward the camera. Ordinary. Professional. Unremarkable. Still, I could not stop looking at it. Later that afternoon, Daniel called again. His voice carried a nervous energy. I asked Mom about the conference. I immediately sat up straighter. What happened? She said she barely remembered it. Daniel paused. Then I showed her the picture. I waited. Dad, she looked terrified. The word hung in the air between us. Terrified. Not annoyed. Not confused. Not dismissive. Terrified. Daniel explained that Carolyn quickly ended the conversation and left the room. A few hours later, she sent him a text asking him to stop researching old records. According to her, digging into the past would only hurt people. I stared at the wall while he spoke. That sounded familiar. For years, every difficult question had somehow become dangerous to ask. Every missing answer had been wrapped in warnings about moving on. But the older I became, the more I realized that truth does not disappear simply because people avoid it. Eventually, it waits at the surface, patient, silent, until something brings it back. That evening, another notification appeared on my phone. This one came from the DNA service itself. A new family connection had been added to the network. My hand froze above the screen. Because this time, the name was not Grant Holloway. This time, it was Emily. For several seconds, I simply stared at the screen. Emily's name remained there, glowing softly beneath the notification as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. But nothing about it felt ordinary. My hands began to tremble. Daniel had been the first unexpected piece of the puzzle. Now Emily had somehow become part of it too. I sat down slowly and opened the report. The relationship estimates were complicated, filled with percentages and charts I did not fully understand. Yet one thing was immediately clear. The system was connecting multiple people through the same branch of genetic matches. And at the center of those connections stood the same name that had appeared days earlier. Grant Holloway. I rubbed my forehead and tried to think logically. Emotions were dangerous at moments like this. Assumptions could destroy families just as easily as lies could. I needed facts. Nothing else. A few minutes later, my phone rang. This time it was not Daniel. It was Emily. I had not spoken to her in months. Hearing her voice instantly brought back memories of pigtails, school concerts, and afternoons spent teaching her how to ride a bicycle. "Dad?" she asked quietly. "Yes, sweetheart." The old nickname slipped out before I could stop it. Neither of us acknowledged it. "Daniel told me about the DNA notifications," she said. I did not know whether to call. I closed my eyes. "I am glad you did." Her voice sounded nervous. Not angry. Not distant. Just uncertain. "Mom has been acting strange all week." I listened carefully. Emily explained that Carolyn had become increasingly anxious whenever the topic came up. She avoided questions. She changed subjects. She seemed constantly worried about who might be contacting whom. The behavior did not sound like someone dealing with a harmless mistake. It sounded like someone trying to prevent something from being discovered. "Emily," I said carefully, "have you ever heard the name Grant Holloway before?" Silence filled the line. Then she answered, "Actually, yes." My heart skipped a beat. "Where?" "I found it years ago in an old box of documents when I was in high school. Mom took the papers away before I could really look at them." Emily paused. When I asked about it, she became upset and told me it was none of my business. I looked across my apartment toward the photographs still scattered on the table. Every answer seemed to create 3 new questions. Yet for the first time, the questions were leading somewhere. Emily continued speaking. "Dad, I do not know what is happening, but Daniel and I both feel like there is something we were never told." Her words hurt because I understood them completely. That feeling had shaped most of my adult life. We talked for nearly an hour. By the end of the conversation, something had changed. The distance between us felt smaller. Not gone, but smaller. Before hanging up, Emily made a decision that surprised me. She said she wanted to request additional DNA records and family match details directly from the service. She wanted facts. The same thing I wanted. The same thing Daniel wanted. As I ended the call, another realization settled over me. For 12 years I thought I had lost my children. Yet somehow, through a mystery none of us understood, we were finally searching for the truth together. 3 days later, the additional DNA reports arrived. I was sitting at my kitchen table when Daniel called. The moment I answered, I knew something had changed. His voice sounded different. Not frightened. Not confused. Certain. "Dad," the expanded report came through. I gripped the edge of the table. Outside, a delivery truck rolled slowly through the parking lot below my window. Everything around me looked normal, yet nothing felt normal anymore. "What does it say?" I asked. Daniel exhaled slowly. "It confirms the connections are real." For a few seconds neither of us spoke. I had prepared myself for many possibilities, but hearing those words still felt surreal. Emily joined the call a few minutes later. She had received the same information. The three of us spent nearly an hour reviewing reports, percentages, timelines, and family trees generated by the service. None of us were experts, yet the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Certain connections pointed repeatedly toward the same branch, the same unexplained relationship, the same name, Grant Holloway. What unsettled me most was not the data itself. It was the growing realization that Carolyn appeared to have known something for years. Every reaction, every attempt to shut down questions, every effort to discourage research. Looking back, they all carried a different meaning now. Later that afternoon, Daniel sent me copies of several old family documents he had found while cleaning out storage boxes in Carolyn's garage. Most were ordinary: school records, insurance papers, tax forms. Then I noticed something unusual. A folder containing correspondence from years before the divorce. Several pages referenced consulting payments made to outside contractors. One name appeared multiple times: Grant Holloway. I stared at the documents for a long time. The amounts were not enormous. A few $1,000s here, a few thousand there. But the dates caught my attention. They stretched across several years, much longer than a single business project would normally require. That evening, Daniel called again. "Dad, Mom wants to meet." I remained silent. "She contacted both Emily and me this morning," he continued. "She says we are misunderstanding everything." The words sounded familiar. For years, misunderstandings had been used to explain every inconsistency, every missing answer, every uncomfortable question. Did she explain anything? I asked. "No," Daniel said. "She just wants all of us together." After the call ended, I walked through my apartment thinking about the strange path that had led us here. A week earlier, I believed my life had settled into a permanent routine. Now my children were speaking to me regularly again. Old records were resurfacing. Questions that had slept for more than a decade were demanding answers. The following morning, Emily called. Her voice sounded nervous. "Dad, I think Mom is scared." I looked out the window at the gray Ohio sky. "Why do you think that?" "Because she keeps asking whether we contacted Grant directly." That detail stopped me cold. Not because of what it revealed, but because of what it implied. Carolyn was not worried about the reports anymore. She was worried about conversations. She was worried about people comparing memories, timelines, and facts. For the first time since this began, I felt certain of one thing. Whatever truth had been hidden all these years was no longer protected by silence. And whether Carolyn wanted it or not, the moment was approaching when all of us would finally sit in the same room and hear the answers together. We met on a Saturday afternoon in a private room at a small restaurant halfway between Columbus and Dayton. I arrived first. Daniel came a few minutes later. Emily followed shortly after that. Seeing both of my children walk through the door together felt strange and wonderful at the same time. 12 years of distance could not disappear in a week, but something important had changed. We were finally sitting on the same side of the table. Carolyn arrived last. The moment she entered the room, I noticed how tired she looked. Not older, just exhausted, like someone who had spent years carrying a burden that had suddenly become impossible to hide. For several moments, nobody spoke. The sounds of dishes and quiet conversations drifted in from the dining room outside. Finally, Carolyn folded her hands and looked at Daniel and Emily. "I know why you wanted this meeting," she said softly. Daniel did not waste time. He placed several printed reports on the table. DNA matches, family connections, historical records. Carolyn stared at them without touching them. Then Emily asked the question all of us had been carrying. "Mom, what are we missing?" Carolyn closed her eyes. When she opened them again, something in her expression had changed. The defensiveness was gone. The excuses were gone. In their place was simple resignation. She explained that years ago she had made decisions she was not proud of, decisions she convinced herself would never resurface. She admitted that Grant Holloway had been a far more important part of her life than she had ever revealed. She admitted that she spent years trying to prevent old connections from being rediscovered. Every sentence seemed to make her shoulders sink lower. No one interrupted. No one raised their voice. We simply listened. When she finally finished speaking, silence filled the room. Daniel stared down at the table. Emily wiped away tears. I felt many emotions, but anger was surprisingly absent. 12 years earlier, I might have wanted revenge. 12 years earlier, I might have wanted someone to blame. But age changes people. Loss changes people. Sitting there, I realized that the greatest cost had never been the house or the money. It had been the years we lost as a family. After a long silence, Daniel spoke first. Then Emily. Questions were asked. Answers were given. Not every mystery was resolved that day, but enough truth emerged for all of us to understand the larger picture. Eventually, the conversation shifted away from the past and toward the future. For the first time in years, we talked about holidays, birthdays, and ordinary things families discuss when they are trying to rebuild. As the afternoon sun began fading outside the windows, Emily reached across the table and squeezed my hand. It was such a small gesture, yet it meant more to me than any legal document ever could. Weeks later, my apartment felt different. Not because the furniture changed. Not because I suddenly became wealthy. Nothing like that happened. What changed was the silence. Daniel called regularly. Emily visited whenever she could. Family photographs no longer felt like relics from a vanished life. They felt connected to a future that still existed. Looking back now, I sometimes think about that first notification. The one that appeared on a quiet Tuesday morning and reopened a chapter one thought was finished forever. It did not give me back the years I lost. Nothing could do that. But it gave me something I never expected to recover. The truth. And once the truth finally arrived, it led me back to the people I loved most.